Hey folks, and welcome back to Dungeons and Drybrushing. Today I'm going to be knocking something off of my crafting list that has been on there forever, and that is planting boxes. A way to bring trees and shrubs into your cityscapes without making it look like they're just growing up out of the cobblestones. Today I'm going to be doing two different styles. I've got this rounded brick medieval style that should be pretty good for most fantasy settings, and I've got more of a rectangular box style that's going to fit in great with my Roman and Greek setting. Now, I have said about 100 times on this channel, and I'm going to keep doing it, that the key to having cool maps is scatter terrain. They not only make things more visually interesting and engaging, they bring the players into the setting, they help tell the story, and they bring in tactical interest, so I'm always happy to bring in some more scatter to my collection. Alright, let's just jump in and get started, and I'll show you how I made them. Since I'm building this specifically to work with my trees, I'm going to start by measuring the trees themselves. Like most of you, I have a few different varieties, and it needs to work with all of them. Luckily, a bit of testing showed they all fit on these circular bases from Reaper, so I'm going to use these bases, a bit of super glue, and the end of a straight pin to create some makeshift circle jigs for my foam cutter. This method isn't perfect and it doesn't last forever, but it's cheap, simple, and it doesn't harm the bases. Just gluing the pin in the center of the base is enough to make it usable as a guide. Then I just pin the shape in the foam and cut around it. If you don't have a foam cutter, you can do this by tracing the shape onto a thin piece of foam and cutting it carefully with a knife that has a fresh blade. The block of foam I'm left with gets sliced thin, and those thin slices will form the base shapes for my planter boxes. Half of the circles will get a smaller circle traced onto them and cut out, so that I'm left with a thin rim piece and an inner circle. The inner circle can just get saved with any other scrap pieces to be used another day. And then of course the jig can get broken up and go back with your other bases. I glue the rims onto the original circles using tacky glue. It's okay if these look a bit rough and don't match up perfectly. They're going to be bricks after all, so that variation is actually a good thing. After that, I take a ballpoint pen and just start to trace in the brick shapes. I go around the top layer first, make sure to get the inside of the rim too, not just the top and outside. And then whatever shapes I traced there, I stagger them on the lower rim, drawing the new brick lines in between the old ones. That leaves me with a more natural looking brick pattern. At this point, I use a tinfoil ball to add stone texture to the entire craft. Now they're a little bit fragile still, so just be careful with it and support it with your hands while you're doing it. The last step before the paint job is a coat of black Mod Podge. Now this step can be skipped if you want, but personally, on a project this fragile that's working with some pretty thin foam pieces, I always like to add an extra layer of glue if I can, just for peace of mind. The paint job on these pieces is going to be very straightforward and simple. Everything gets coated with a medium gray to start with. Then random stones get picked out in a brown and an off-white color. It's not the most exciting color scheme, but for your average fantasy setting, it will be right at home. And if you want to add more color to it, well, that's what the trees are for. So you'll already be using these to bring a splash of color onto your maps. The next step is a black wash. I'll be using my homemade black wash for this, which is a simple black acrylic paint, water, and a few drops of dish soap. I've had comments asking about the inclusion of soap, so if you don't know, the dish soap helps to break the surface tension of the wash, allowing it to flow more easily into the recesses of the project. And once that's dry, I take an off-white and dry brush everything. This will highlight the stone texture again and help to unify all of the colors by giving them a universal highlight. For the final step on this part of the project, I want to add some dirt texture to the inside of the planters. To do that, I just add some PVA glue and use a crappy old brush to spread it around. Then I'm going to use this giant bag of sand. Now you can use a crafting product for this if you want, but a bit of sand or dirt from the yard or garden works just as well. If you're using any product from outside though, you do want to bake it in the oven first to sanitize it. The last thing you want is for your old crafting projects to get moldy. And then it's time to move on to the next style. For the rectangular planter boxes, I start by measuring the base of the biggest tree I plan to use to make sure they'll fit inside, just like before. You could use dollar store craft foam for this project if you wanted to, but because I'm making multiple planter boxes, it's easier to cut the sizes I need from large chunks of foam and then mill them down to make multiples at the same size. That saves time and ensures that all three planters are matching. I'm using foam offcuts from bigger projects to make these. Always save your offcuts if they're big enough to use, and if they're not, I'll save them anyway and make bricks out of them. There's no point in wasting material and money. I want to give all of these pieces their stone texture before they're assembled. That's because these planters are going to have some harder to reach places for one, but also because some of the pieces I'm working with are quite thin. Rather than risk damaging them later when they're glued in place, I'll just texture them ahead of time. I'm going to use hot glue to assemble this project. You could technically use tacky glue and pins to do this, but that seemed like it would be a mess, and pinning foam pieces that are this thin, it's always a pain. So I set my hot glue gun to its lowest heat to avoid melting the foam, and then I just take the assembly step by step. Hot glue is honestly not the strongest bond, but for something with this many connection points, it should be alright. And once assembled, it doesn't hurt to do a final check and make sure everything fits together the way it's supposed to. Better to do it now and find out you made a mistake, rather than wait until you've built all three. Now that I know it fits the way I want, I coat everything with watered down Mod Podge. Now I want these to stay pretty light in color, so I'm not mixing any black paint in. This is just an extra coat of glue to help protect things and make them a little stronger. The painting technique for these is pretty different from the earlier one. I have 4 colors picked out: a light orange, a light pink, a dark mustard yellow, and a khaki. I brush and stipple these on everywhere, randomly, wet blending them together at the edges. Now there's no pattern to this, I painted on a whim. Now I've said before that stone can be just about every color, and it's true, and that includes pinks, yellows, and oranges. This matches the color palette and visual themes for my current setting, but you can use whatever you want for your own. If it's a forest or a tropical jungle setting, you could use browns or grays, and then maybe a tint of green on the bottom half of the boxes to indicate moss or algae. If you want a more cold, sterile, snowy setting, you could go with grays that lean toward blue, and maybe even use a Payne's Gray or a blue-black wash to get some really frigid shadows. Or if you're leaning towards a more grimdark setting, getting some purple into the shadows might be a good idea. But my setting is warm coastal scrubland and desert, so it's warm colors and a homemade brown wash made with sepia ink to keep everything in that brown-yellow spectrum. You'll see in the finished pictures how keeping that color palette in mind really makes the entire scenery set feel like it belongs together. It also helps to tell a story and to draw your players into the setting if it consistently looks like it matches the narrative you're spinning. And as a final step after washing and dry brushing are done, I do the same thing I did with the other planter boxes and glue some dirt in the bottom, which pretty much finishes things off. Alright folks, that about wraps things up for our our planter boxes. Thank you for watching. Please, if you've enjoyed the video, hit like and subscribe. Additionally, there are a few links below if you want to support the channel and throw us a few dollars to keep things rolling here. On top of that, it is one of my goals to get to 1,000 subscribers before the end of the year, and we are so close. So if you know anyone who you think might enjoy these videos, please link them, share them, send them along. It would mean a great deal to me. Alright, I'll see you on the next one. Thank you for watching.